G'day there, my name is Luke, and the purpose of this tutorial is to show you how powerful modern digital filter programs are and to demonstrate when and where to use them in your workflow. I'll show you when to use them when editing a traditional photograph and also a HDR image. Also how to just use parts of the filtered image and discard the rest. I'll give you some editing tips for when you are back in Photoshop as well. And lastly, everyone loves a discount, and OnOne and Topaz agreed to give all my viewers 15% off their software using the code Zeme Photography. So that's 15% off OnOne's Perfect Effects 4 and Topaz Adjust 5. So just before I start the tutorial, I just wanted to share some of my thoughts on filters. And this is just looking through my photography shop. So there are some misconceptions out there where people think using filters is cheating. But to me they are just a simple modern version of the old tone glass filters used in front of lenses, how photographers used to use different films as well. The beauty of the filter system that we now have is that we can create hundreds of different styles all from one image file using filter software. And some of the positives of the modern system are the software programs out there are now incredibly powerful, they're cheap, just one program offers a huge variety of filters and they're perfect for just experimenting at home. They're easy and fast to use, and they offer you the ability to change a little or a lot depending on what you're after. You can get filter programs to work inside Photoshop, Lightroom, or get standalone versions as well. So personally, I just see filters as just another tool that I can use to adjust the colors and tones of images. I took myself out in the field, and I see a camera as a tool with settings, and my filter programs is just an extension of this. Alright, so let's get started. I thought I'd do a standard edit first and then a HDR edit, and I'm just going to demonstrate how to use the two separate filter programs from OnOne, which is Perfect Effects 4, and from Topaz, which is Adjust 5. I think before smartphones and apps like Instagram and Snapseed, it wasn't really clear what filters were, but now everyone can take a shot with their phone and apply filters to make them look vintage and make small adjustments to contrast and colour quite easily. There was always filters tab in Photoshop, but they weren't very creative and didn't really inspire. The filter programs I'm going to show you today, OnOne's Perfect Effects 4 and Topaz's Adjust 5, will work with images taken on any camera or device. You simply just have to upload them onto your Mac. It's pretty easy really. Okay, so I'm going to show you a standard edit, how I would use filters in my standard workflow, and by that I mean I only use one image rather than 5 or 7, which I use in my HDR workflows. So I'm going to show you how to use OnOne Perfect Effects 4 filter program. So I went from this image to this in a matter of minutes, maybe 5 to 10. I wrote my workflow for everyone. So I start in Lightroom and I make small adjustments using the slider panels to brightness, contrast, saturation, just whatever you think the image needs. And then I export to Photoshop, and then from Photoshop I select the layer and then I open my filter program to make adjustments to that layer. You certainly don't need to start in Lightroom. You can just open up your images in Photoshop or the standalone filter programs and go from there, but I like to make little adjustments and have more control. I've just made small adjustments to what I thought the image needed. So then we just go down to just right click the image, edit in Photoshop, edit with a copy of Lightroom adjustments, yes, and I'll just open it up here. Just going to unlock, so I just double click that padlock there, that unlocks the image. Now if you had multiple layers here, you could use a filter on just the one layer, but yeah, I just have the one layer, so I only have to open up the filter program and it will be applied to this layer here. So I purchased OnOne's Photo Suite 7 and it has a whole bunch of programs, but just the filter program is called Perfect Effects 4. So we just open up that. So I'll just give you a quick tour of Perfect Effects 4. Straight up you're faced with this large preview area, which is essentially your workspace, and then up the top here you've got your masking brush and your masking bug, and if you come down here you'll be able to show the masks in various formats. We've also got the quick and easy category sections, which are all down the left hand side here, and there's over 450 different filters. I've also got the new favorite section, so I can just flag one of my favorites and then come back to it whenever I want. A new search feature, so you can just search for contrast, say, and all the filters that use contrast will come up. Some of the cool ones are movie looks, glow, and also there's some really good ones that I use in landscape section. So with this image, what I want to accentuate is the sky, because it's actually quite beautiful silhouette, and the sweeping river, and also I want to bring out more of the buildings in this image too. So we start with going to color correction, and I'll come down to warmer. I'll make the strength of the filter effect about 80, increase the temperature to 70, just give it a little more saturation, and I'm just going to select auto cast removal as well. Next up, I want to only mask little bits through. So the reason is because I like what it did to the clouds, but it made the sky go a little grey, the blue sky area. So selecting the masking brush and changing the opacity down a little bit, I'm able to the original layer underneath show through. So I just go over the areas that I'd like to show through, and I'll just show you the mask. You can see it comes up in pink, and that's just a quick way to mask in your stacked effects directly here inside Perfect Effects 4. So you used to have to go back into Photoshop, do your masking on an individual effect, and then come back in and go out and come back in. But now it's all just done in here, which is so much faster. So next I'm going to select a landscape effect, Magic Desert. It's a little too strong, so I'll bring down the amount to 60, and then just click add, and that will stack it on the effects layers. Next I'll just give the image a little bit of a glow, and I'll select the dark glow effect. Same again, it's too strong, so I'll bring that down to 20 and drop the strength of the filter to 40. And then I just click apply, and then I'll bring it back into Photoshop. So here we are back in Photoshop, and I'll show you the main reason why I like to use the filter programs in Photoshop. It's because I have this new layer, and I'm actually able to mask in areas from the original layer beneath now. So the next part of the process is to keep parts that you like from the filter and discard the rest by using a layer mask. Just down there, select it. Select your brush and adjust the opacity of the brush. So let's start at about 15%. And a good tip for landscapes and skies where the graduation is quite small, bring down your hardness of your brush and make it quite soft. So let's say 15 or 10 to 15 is really good. You could imagine it being like a spray paint where it's splattering but not making a really hard straight line. So you just paint over the areas where you'd like the original layer beneath to show. Just showing you there. So I'd like to keep some of that blue, and by selecting the backslash key, which is next to the delete, I'm able to see where the layer mask is being applied and the various opacities. See here I made it 100%, just to give a prime example of how masking works. And you just go over the areas that you'd want to show through. I'd never actually mask through 100% on the sky, but I just wanted to show you. Another thing that I didn't like about the filter application was how dark it made these buildings. So I'll just select my brush again, go around 15% and start painting through the buildings from underneath. And this will just help them to pop out in the image a little more rather than being hidden. I'm just going over the areas that were white, just adding a little more coolness. Not cool as in wow that's cool, but as in warm and cool to the image will help give it a contrast. So I'm finished with that mask. So I'll just select them both by selecting the first, holding Control and selecting the second one, and then hitting Control E, and that combines them into one layer. So next, the thing I want to adjust is the lean in the buildings. So I've used an ultra wide angle lens and it can distort a little bit. So I select the entire image by selecting Control A, then Control T, then right clicking and selecting warp. And you can just see how you can move areas around without actually having to crop the image. So I've already got the rulers showing, and I just click and drag ruler lines across, and this will give me a guide as to vertical and horizontal. I'm just using the vertical ones. So zooming in, I'm just able to see how off vertical some of these buildings are, and selecting the control points, we just click and drag them. I'm able to make small adjustments to the whole image without cropping, and that's really important because I'm actually able to keep the same resolution. I've skipped ahead to where I'm happy with all the adjustments, and I'm just hitting enter to finalize the transformation. I'll probably also adjust the contrast and the sharpness in specific areas like in the trees and buildings, but other than that, maybe a luminosity mask. But yeah, the main power, as I said, is being able to mask in these effects, not at full opacities, but multiple opacities, and therefore you can just take a little bit from each one. So here's the final product, and you can see there's a lot more definition in the foreground, and the river has made a much brighter reflection of the sky. Okay, now I'm going to do the HDR workflow. Okay, so this is where to use filters in a HDR workflow. So on your camera, you shoot your bracketed images using aperture priority, and then open them in Lightroom, export them as JPEGs to your tone mapping software. So I use Photomatix and Ola Neo HDR engine, as well as NIK HDR FX Pro. So you make your tone map image, you use that image with these 5 images as well, layered into Photoshop. And I'll just rush through that because I've already done a HDR workflow previously, and you can find that on my YouTube channel. So this is an image of mine titled Sydney Wakes Up, and I use the Nikon D800 with the 14 to 24mm lens, and I shot this through the window of the Boulevard Hotel on William Street, 15 stories up. It's a fantastic view across Woolloomooloo, the Domain Garden, City CBD, Harbour Bridge. There's the Alcala of New South Wales, and then Sydney Harbour. So this probably took me 2 hours of editing, and I'll just show you how I went about it. So you just go to Bridge, there's the tone mapped image I made, and I actually used 7 frames for my HDR bracket. So I might just use, say, the 0, -1, +1, and +2 tools. Photoshop, load files into Photoshop layers. Quickly see what it is. You just make a layer mask, select your brush, adjust your opacity, and then you just bring in areas that you'd like from the layer below. So you might bring in these tail lights. I'm just doing this really rough to give you an idea. You'd combine that layer, make a new layer mask, bring in areas that you like from the layer below, such until you end up with something like this. And the main reason you do that is because these images can tend to be a little flat, and by bringing out the areas from each frame that really makes the image have pop and look good to you is how you make a nice HDR image. So I wanted to use the other filter program, Topaz Adjust 5, on this one. Topaz Adjust 5 makes destructive changes to the layer, so you want to duplicate it. So go to Layer, Duplicate Layer, and select a name. And you can see I've just selected the one layer, and I go to Filter, Topaz Labs, Topaz Adjust 5, and that's opening up Adjust 5. So the effects are bundled into categories, varying from your classic filters, HDR ones, to more artistic ones down in the stylized section. So if you drag your mouse over an effect, it will give you a preview of it in the upper left hand corner, and then by clicking it you'll get specific settings applied to the image in the main view. Over on the right hand side is where you'll find all the individual settings which the user can adjust themselves. Topaz adopted an easy to use slider system which I've found great. Also on the edges you'll find these two little arrows that you collapse the side panels to get a full screen view, which is nice if you just want to consider the changes that you've made. So I want to give this image a little more pop to it, so I'll go up to Classical Collection, scroll down and choose Photo Pop, and I'll go over to the settings on the right to make my global adjustments. So under Color I want to increase the saturation to about 1.15. I'll look at the adaptive saturation as well, maybe increase that to 0.25. And what else? And the contrast. So I'm going to adjust the sharpening, so I went up to the 1:1 ratio, so it's zoomed a little more, and I'll just find an area where I can use to view the setting changes. So I'll just increase the sharpening to say 2.50, press enter. Yeah, and that's about what I'm after. Zoom back out by pressing Fit next to the 1:1, and that's it for that. I'll just click OK. Now it will load back as a layer in Photoshop. So Topaz has created its own layer here above the original, and you can have a look underneath. So I'd create a layer mask on that, use my brush, and again take out parts that I don't like and go over the image like this. And then what you could do is collapse the image into one, and you can go back into Topaz again and just continue on like that, taking parts from filters that you do like and discarding parts that you don't. So that completes the tutorial on how to use filters in a traditional or a HDR workflow. But if you go to lukezeme.com, that's my website, tutorials, you can get 15% off either of OnOne's Perfect Effects 4 or Topaz Adjust 5. Just go down to recommendations for HDR photography and scroll down to the filter programs, and there's Perfect Effects 4 and describing how to get the 15% off in Topaz Adjust 5. Cheers, hope to see you next time.